Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Shay with Amos. I'm your host, Jacob Gorgie, and joining me today is Joe Moawad. How are you?
Hello. Hey, Jacob. Thanks for inviting me. This is awesome.
No problem. Thanks for coming. So, let's start. That was the smoothest intro I've ever done. Oh my gosh.
Well, you got me. He actually gives you real Shay, real tea. So I'm very impressed. And we got a personalized mug here. It's awesome. I love it.
So now that we're done with the shameless product placement, let's get started. Let's start from the beginning. Mm-hmm. So usually when I say let's start from the beginning, it usually means when did you come from Egypt? Mm-hmm. But you were born in Toronto, in Canada?
Edmonton, yeah, Canada.
Edmonton. So really from the beginning, what was, I guess, childhood like being someone that was born in the, not the U.S., but North America?
Yeah.
So
I was born in Edmonton in Canada, mm-hmm. and actually I came here when I was 2. So for all essential purposes, I was raised in Chicago from 2 on.
Okay.
It was great. It was I was born in 1970, so my 70s and 80s were my elementary, high school, and college years. So definitely a different world back then.
Yeah, and you were also just trying to remember. So you were also kind of the same generation as our previous guest, Ray Shanuda.
Mm-hmm.
Who,
we knew each other in our 70s.
Yeah. And you guys were in the same Sunday school class.
Mm-hmm.
So if you guys remember from the previous season, we had actually your mom, Tant Fariel Mawad, and Tant Maria Boutar, and they were kind of the ones, if I remember correctly, they were the ones kind of running it. And they said there's two classes, the younger one and the older one. So you were in that younger class and then moved up. So what was kind of being in that younger class? I mean, what was that like?
Yeah, so in the 70s and even the 80s, the church was way, way smaller. I'm sure you've heard that from other folks. So now where we can, have 20, 30 kids in every grade, back then it was 10, 15 kids, for 3, 4 grades. So we basically had 2 classes in Sunday school. So a much closer, smaller knit community. And it was very different than today, but the thing I love is kind of the foundations of what we have today was set back then in, like I said, the 70s and 80s. Yeah. So just in terms of like Sunday school, we had the beginnings of the Sunday school program. So they established kind of the system back then early in the church, and that same system we continue on today, and it's scaled to what we have today, 300-400 kids in Sunday school versus 20-30 kids back then.
Yeah, and then that kind of leads us into kind of your teenage years, kind of high school and college. This is when I believe this is kind of the time they started introducing conventions, these big giant retreats where everyone would gather. So what were your like kind of memories of those big conventions from back in the day?
Yeah, I mean, so actually even in the 70s and early 80s, we started a lot of activities in the church, and this was kind of the golden era of the church because every idea was a new idea and everyone was excited. So early on, even before the conventions, I think some of the cool new ideas were things like the camps, right? Everyone talks about the 3-day camps, the tent camps. And, my parents' generation, they really were just winging it. They just, they saw what maybe the Boy Scouts were doing or other organizations, and they said, well, we need to do something to make our kids really love being at church in terms of activities, right? We don't want church to be just come and go on Sunday. We want them to really create a community and friendships in the church. So that's why they started a lot of activities. So the 3-day camps was one of the first ones. And those, like I said, in the early years, they were not as organized and coordinated like we have now. But I think our parents' generation, they just had a good idea, good intentions, and they kind of just, I guess the best word is winging it, but it's not really winging it. They trusted that God would help them figure it out.
Yeah.
So they didn't even know how to put up tents, right? And they didn't know, there was no buses, no U-Haul. They used to just buy tents, throw it on top of their cars, and stuff as many kids in every car as possible. I remember one time even driving to the campground. One of the leaders put the tents on top of his car, and he forgot to wrap it well. So we get to the campground, and there's actually no tent on the car anymore. So that's just an example of how, the good intentions, the good heart, God in the middle of it, we figured it out. So someone went and got a new tent, and everything worked out.
Yeah. And that kind of goes on to this idea of community. Now, I'm was also born here in the States, and I know a lot of people who were.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I've always wondered, did you ever feel like, I don't know how to word this right, but like, you ever feel like there was a separation of the two communities? You know, like your school friends and your church or whatever. But like, did you ever feel like you were closer with one than the other? Or did you feel like they were like the same? Or do you feel like there was a separation?
Yeah, I think for those of my generation that grew up here in those early days, our parents were, you could say more strict or more protective of us because they're new to America and they really didn't know, what the outside community would do. Of course, there's great people outside of the community as well, but they were just a little more protective because it's the first generation. So they wanted us to create our friendships and our communities in the church, which is why they wanted a lot of activities in the church. So you could say in the beginning maybe they were strict, but I think most of the people of our generation, we actually loved hanging out at church with our friends from church, whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
That's why the camps were great. Coming to Vespers, Shay was great. We would always go out to eat after church on Saturdays. We even the parents created communities and trips. We started Green Lake was an early a family retreat that included everyone. And then the conventions. I never answered your question about the convention. The conventions, when I became a teenager, those started as well. And we would go for a week and visit people from, other Midwest churches. To make the reason we did all those things is obviously we wanted to focus on, our spiritual lives and get those lessons, but also to create a sense of community that we weren't really that different. There were a lot of people like us, whether in Chicago, in the church, or in other cities, and make us proud of our background and heritage. So, we would always, growing up, we just would look forward to the next activity. We loved to do stuff in the church with our family. That was like the most important thing to us. We used to sleep at our friends at church's homes. We used to have outings on Saturday every month. We called them Nedwas. They're just activities. I think we sometimes even use that word till today.
Yeah.
So absolutely, where our community, our friends were all in the church, and we kept looking forward to those.
Yeah, and then that kind of goes on to my next question, which is, if you guys remember from last episode, Ray Shuda. So you and Ray are essentially like hold the same positions where you guys are like the coordinators for Sunday school now in St. Mark.
Well, Ray's the big shot. I like try to be his wingman.
Yeah, but you've been serving also for quite a long time, if I remember correctly. And so my question is, what was that experience like as a young servant, especially without kind of, I guess you could say, the luxurious servants prep we have today, where you have like a 2-year program that where it preps us. So back in the day when that didn't exist, what did you do to prep? Was there any prep? And then what was that kind of experience like comparing to what you have today?
So I think, growing up, like I mentioned, we really, everything was centered around the church, which, I'm not going to say it's different than today, but in those early days, we really were so focused on the church community, and we didn't do as many things, outside of the church in the activities. So, the nice thing was our parents paved the way for us. They did all the hard work. So when we got to the later ages of high school and college, we felt like we were lucky, in the sense we were spoiled. Our parents did all the hard work. They set up the churches, they developed the systems, they started the activities. So the least we could do was kind of try to continue some of those activities, whether it's teaching Sunday school or serving in the camps. So it was just natural. Back to your question, what was it like? It was just natural. We didn't have a formal servants prep. It was just if we were interested, if we had the desire, if we felt like that was our way to serve, we would just be a part of the service meeting and find a service that worked for us. So I would say the same thing we look for today. Once again, we're probably not as structured with the training as we are now, which is great that we have that now. But if we had the right heart, commitment, focus on service, we did. I mean, I was leading 3-day camps in my early 20s. That's why I keep telling everyone, I'm ready to retire. It's been 30 years. I need to hand it to the next group of leaders. Same thing with Sunday school, right? Obviously, I still serve in Sunday school, but the next generation, your age, the 20s and 30-year-olds, they're the ones that probably relate better to the younger kids. So they're slowly taking more of a leadership role. And it was the same thing back when I was growing up. When I was in my 20s and 30s, folks in their 50s and 60s, like myself, were starting to hand over a lot of the leadership.
I see. And then let's actually take a second then to talk about your leadership at 3-Day Camp, because I actually forgot about that. But you said early 20s when you started leading 3-Day Camp. So when you became, because 3-Day Camp is a service that you experienced as a kid. So when you were going into now as like a leader of that, I guess first of all, what things kind of opened your eyes to like how complicated that service could be? And then what things did you change or find like worked better, I guess?
Yeah, so I think with camps and some of the other services, kind of the theme was, the idea, the structure was there, and I think as we evolved, as the church got bigger, we kind of had to get a little more organized and a little more professional about it. Maybe that's the right way, even though I'm not that professional. Yeah. So, for instance, I say the kids camps. Early when we were doing it, it was just basically, we would jump in a few cars, we would put tents on on the top of our cars, and we would go and we would kind of figure it out as we went. As camps got bigger, we had more kids. We had to get a little more organized and structured. So we started booking buses, for instance. We started getting a U-Haul. We started really documenting the meals and figuring out what we could do. So the important thing is the idea and the right heart and the right spirit. And if you got that in there, you know what? You're just setting the foundation for the future.
And that kind of leads me on to my outlook question. And in these interviews, I always like to ask an outlook question. Get your advice for future generations. So my outlook question for you: as the church grows and becomes more diverse, and when I mean diverse, I mean kids like me who are first generation, second, third, fourth generation, alongside with people who are just coming from Egypt, right? As those two communities become bigger and more diverse, as the church grows, what advice would you give to, I guess, not only future Sunday school servants, but kind of to the future generation on how to keep, I guess, a sense of unity between the two? Because, I mean, I think there's no secret that like sometimes there's a bit of a cultural gap sometimes. So how do we mend that gap and keep it mended?
No, it's a great question, because you're right. There are a lot of different groups and demographics in the church now, right? You have people that don't really know much Arabic and grew up here like me and yourself, people that are first generation, second generation, people still immigrating from Egypt, some people that don't have a Coptic background. And I think the key, and actually you find the pioneers, the early immigrants of our church did this. They focused on activities for the kids. I think that's what unites everyone. Because what we found over the years is when people immigrate, right, it might be harder for the older generation to fully integrate, but their kids integrate pretty quickly. Within a few years, there's not much difference between kids. They know English well, especially when they immigrate, like before their, say, teenage years, right? So I think the key is kind of twofold. First of all, we have to have a welcoming and inclusive spirit as a church, and that's welcoming every person of every background. Once again, whether they're recent immigrants from Egypt or someone from the community, we have to make sure we focus on activities, especially for kids, because if the kids can start to form friendships, it starts to blur those lines between some of those different groups I mentioned before. And I think the third thing is we have to also, right now we have so many people in this church and so many, like I said, people that we need to really reach out to and serve, that we haven't nearly done as much as we need with outreach in the community outside of the church. So we need to do more of those activities. We have the festival, we have activities in the community, whether it's charitable activities or doing things like a Christmas Around the World in the Museum of Science and Industry. Those are outreach activities. And as we become more organized, we need to recruit more people to focus on that portion of service. So a lot of different types of services that we need. And I think the key is we need to continue to find people that can serve different demographic groups in the church.
I see. Well, thank you so much for coming on then. That's the interview. Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
No
Thank you
problem.
for the mug. I don't know if you can see that. Personalized mug with the logo
Yeah.
and actually my name now. I love it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, James, who was the one that made that for us? We had some guy make it. It was awesome. So thank you to that person. We'll link him in the description below. So that's all we have for you guys tonight. Thank you guys so much for watching. God bless and good night.